Hello, I'm Nico, and welcome to Debate Clash. You'll notice in this video that it's in a little bit of a different format. Now the reason for that is me and Michael, another founder of Debate Clash who has 4 years of public forum experience, we decided that these topic analyses are designed for brainstorming purposes. So we might as well try to get them out as early as possible, keep them a little bit casual, kind of just show you what we do for brainstorming. So, once again, this is Michael, 4 years PF debate experience.
Hi.
Along those lines, I also wanted to thank everyone for subscribing and also supporting us by buying products in the Debate Clash marketplace. If you haven't already, make sure to tell your debate coach about the briefs that exist in the shop and hit that subscribe button. Now, without further ado, let's move into the resolution, which is resolved. On balance, the benefits of the Internet of Things outweigh the harms of decreased personal privacy.
So first thing we're going to go over is what is the Internet of Things? So you can think of it kind of like the Internet, obviously the Internet of Things, but instead of it being just computers or like cell phones, things like that, we're expanding it to include everything that connects to the Internet. So smart TVs, smart fridges, anything you can think of that's smart is going to be connected to the Internet of Things.
Which is fantastic. Now, trailing off on that thought, we have the affirmatives burden and we have the negatives burden. Now, looking at the resolution again, the affirmatives burden is to defend all of the benefits, any benefits that derive from the connectivity of all these devices. That is affirmative ground.
So the burden of the negative is going to be defending the harm of decrease of personal privacy against the benefits of the Internet of Things. So basically you're going to want to say that the detriments to personal privacy are worse than the benefits provided by the Internet of Things.
And with that, let's not forget about the first portion of the resolution, which says on balance. This is generally used in past topics to show an impact calculus basis, a comparison, all benefits versus personal privacy. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the affirmative side of things. On the affirmative, we're going to diagnose the arguments into 4 separate categories. First is going to be economy, then security, other benefits, and finally the workarounds.
So the first one, going on to the economy. So obviously, the economy, businesses, right? That's your first thought. So how are businesses helped by the Internet of Things? The first thing we're going to look at is businesses' efficiency and able to actually work as businesses is improved by the Internet of Things because it allows them to automate processes, do a lot of things that they weren't able to do beforehand. Along with that, the Internet of Things also provides them with more data input. And as companies gain data and knowledge, they're better able to predict markets, predict where their products are going to succeed, and they're able to better reach out and take hold of those opportunities and succeed, which is going to invest more money in the economy and then bolster the economy that way. Not only though that will they be able to see new opportunities as far as like markets go on a national level, it's gonna also allow them to look at international to expand markets that way, and then also to develop new products. What are people buying? What do they want? And this data, these analytics are going to be able to provide that information for companies and allow them to grow, expand, and therefore reinvest money in the economy goes up.
Now, obviously, the Internet of Things helps businesses that already exist by growing, expanding into other markets, data analytics, but it can also help small businesses start up. For example, Michael and I started out Debate Clash. We are very poor going to college. We don't have much money, but what we do have is we have passion. Obviously very cliche and cheesy. But the idea is that the Internet of Things allows individuals to start up a company. They can throw up a website, sell products on it, and ultimately benefit themselves. So it helps small businesses bolster, which there's a lot of studies that show that small business growth directly helps the economy and helps local money circulate. So These are the economy arguments. Now, the second category is security. The first thing we can look at with security, especially in relation to businesses, is that businesses are less likely to lose important data. When a business stores information, they no longer store it on a laptop or their desktop computer. It's stored in the cloud, which is essentially a server that has immense security means. So if someone comes in, raids their entire business, and destroys everything, they still have their important data. So security for businesses is exceptionally important. The other thing that the Internet of Things has developed is the tracking down of bad individuals or even terrorists. Nowadays, everyone essentially wears a microphone and 2 cameras with their phone on them in their pocket. You can track down a lot of information in terms of finding missing children, finding bad individuals. All of these are beneficial to the world. Along these lines too, you also have drones. Without the Internet of Things, without things being connected, drones would not be able to have non-violent surveillance and find information that we might not otherwise be able to find. Yeah, you want to move on?
So that directly leads into the transparency of government. As the Internet of Things grows, so does our information and our ability to access that information. And so we want to know about what's going on in the world, right? What is our government doing? Are they doing the right things? Are they doing what we want them to do? And so one of the ways we see that is, I mean, you've probably seen the news all the time lately, police and body cams, right? Police brutality, people are dying, things are happening, and we need to make sure these police are wearing body cams so we know they're not doing the wrong thing. So basically, the Internet of Things is allowing us to have more transparency with government, and so we know what they're doing. We know they're protecting us and not serving their own ends. And then along with that, or I guess on an opposite note, not only will it help us with the government, like transparency that way, but it's also going to help us with our own personal security. Because it allows us to have alarm systems that are connected to our phones. Someone rings the doorbell, I can look at my phone and see from the camera right outside the door, who is ringing my doorbell? Is it some, murderer, or is it the old lady down the street? So it just allows you to have better personal security yourself and for your home.
And with that, a lot of negative teams and a lot of individuals in their daily lives might be scared of bad people getting a hold of this information. One thing that I would highly recommend looking up as the affirmative and getting statistics on is how hard it is to hack these softwares. A lot of them are encrypted with, I think the standard is SHA-528 or RSA 4096-bit encrypted. Essentially a lot of buzzwords saying that things don't get hacked. So look up information on the affirmative about that information, The other things that I would recommend looking up is compliance. Medical industries, businesses, they have to have some form of regulation and fit compliance. For example, HIPAA requires every individual in a medical industry to have a separate logon to the computer. Hospitals have been shut down because their radiology department all had the same username. This is actually one of my coworkers directly saw this, but I'm sure there are a lot of statistics about individuals being shut down because they weren't compliant. Businesses have to be compliant, which means that the individual's security is secure.
Exactly.
Now, let's move on to the third category, which is the other benefits. Now, with the other benefits, these are things that don't necessarily fit into the economy and don't necessarily fit into the security. The key to making these arguments beautiful is forcing them to be hyper-specific. For example, if I go into a round against Michael and I say, hey, there's this Android application that was developed and it saves people's lives in this way, this way, this way. Michael has never heard of this application. It's an unpredictable argument. He has no idea what it does, and the judge can relate to it. So in this category, we're going to go over some specifics, but it's important to note, keep your arguments specific in this category and you will go far.
Exactly like that. Taking Nico's Android example, I guess, to just another level as specificity, if that's a word. We're going to roll with that. Say it's a diabetes, like glucose tracker, right? you can go and look at actual studies, actual evidence. How has this tracker helped people live? You know, how has it helped increase their quality of life? But going along on that kind of medical track, you walk into a hospital, there's technology everywhere, right? And it's all connected together. This is like a prime example of the Internet of Things. All of these machines are working together to save people's lives and to help people. Get one of those, really research it, find specific concrete statistics about how it's helped people, and give it in a round. I wouldn't have anything to say against it.
That is beautiful. You have quantifiable impacts, which is the key here. Along these lines, you can also look at popular applications. Uber is one that comes to mind, which has given several individuals that maybe they don't have a job, but they have a car. And now they can have a job. So Uber is a fantastic one. Even, I'm not ashamed to say that I play Pokemon Go, and Pokemon Go has given probably hundreds of people jobs managing servers. These are high quality jobs that didn't exist before. While we were brainstorming for this as well, we also work in an industry. I work on servers. Michael is a developer of applications and software, and we work very closely with companies known as software as service companies, also known as SaaS companies. So I would recommend looking up the most popular software as service companies, seeing what they do, and if you can link that to the Internet of Things, that they wouldn't exist without the Internet of Things, there are so many quantifiable benefits that you can just reap the benefits of.
Perfect. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to workarounds, just some things that might come up when you're on the app and how you can deal with those. So do you want to start there, Nico?
Oh yeah, so let's do this. So talking about framework initially, you can watch my other video about framework to develop kind of what framework is or how it is if you're not necessarily very adept at framework. But on this topic specifically, looking at the resolution, it says that the negative has to defend personal privacy. That is the only impact that they have access to. So I would highly recommend making the judge aware of that. In your framework, say, we as the affirmative get to defend all of the benefits of the Internet of Things. The negative gets to defend the detriment of personal privacy. That is all they have access to, not business, not organizational, personal. It's highly specific, and I actually think it's kind of unfair. Yeah. But we'll roll with it. Go for the affirmative.
And then another thing to note is, again, take notice of on balance. Always be weighing things against what your opponents are saying. So if you give some concrete example of how some application has saved lives, say why that's more important than personal privacy, or it doesn't really matter in the round. And then one last thing to note is in the resolution, it asserts that privacy is affected. So maybe you don't want to spend so much time saying that this doesn't affect personal privacy, like, oh, this company gets hacked, that's not going to affect personal privacy, because the resolution itself is kind of asserting that by saying, you know, how do the benefits outweigh the detriments to personal privacy?
The resolution assumes that personal privacy is decreased.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So just on that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the negative side. Start taking a look at that. So our 4 points on the negative are going to be personal, security, some other things we didn't really know where to put them, and then lastly, we're going to go over some workarounds on the neg side as well. So moving on to our first point of personal. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when you think personal privacy is obviously going to be like ID theft, right? You lose your social security number, your credit card information, that kind of thing. So how does that affect you personally by losing that information? Be sure you're researching what the impacts of decrease of personal privacy actually are. So you want to know that, like, if someone has their social security number stolen and they get their identity stolen, like, what does that do to that person? They go into debt, like they get these loans under this person's name that they don't know about. It ruins their credit. Just be sure you're actually having some impacts that are weighable in the round. Otherwise, it might just be, you know, kind of a lot of fluff that you don't really have any substance there. Moving on from that, so how is personal information, personal privacy decreased? The more the Internet of Things is active, the more information we're giving to companies and the more information they have. Say if a company gets hacked, they lose all that information you've given to them. So you can take a look at that and see how that business side of it links to a decrease in personal privacy. And then not only that, but so let's take a look at social media as an example. So you give all this information to these social media companies, right? You give them constantly where you are, what you're doing, who you're with, like all of this information, and the company doesn't even necessarily have to be hacked. Someone else can go and view your profile and view all of these things and learn about you. And say you have a stalker who can find out all this information and follow you around. I mean,
And with
makes
this,
it really uncomfortable.
It does, definitely. And a lot of these arguments are going to be exceptionally hard to quantify, especially when it's going to be an impact calculus at the end of the round. So pay attention in the fourth category, the workarounds in the framework. We'll talk a little bit more about how these can be applied to the round in order to win. Also, going on off that idea with the personal basis, I also think it's important to note that the resolution doesn't specify the present. It doesn't say, as of right now, the Internet of Things is beneficial or not. What it says is the Internet of Things, essentially it just compares the benefits of the Internet of Things to personal privacy. The Internet of Things is a concept. Actually, some experts hypothesize that the Internet of Things doesn't actually exist. So what we have seen with our brainstorming session is that right now things are spying on us, right? We have TVs. Samsung had a big outbreak of their TVs were spying on consumers. We have fridges that are spying on us. We have even thermostats that track if you're in the room or not. These are all a part of the Internet of Things. And this is right now. What are they going to be in 10 to 20 years? Those are all negative arguments, right? It's essentially a big eye, the eye of Sauron, looking over you through the Internet of Things. So expounding on those, the future and potential privacy infringement could also be very strong for the negative. If you're looking as well, a lot of these arguments can be supercharged through philosophical ideals. For example, look up the philosophers Heidegger and Foucault. Both of them have criticized technology in the past, how it affects our lives, and how it essentially changes us as individuals. So we won't go into hyper specifics of how of their philosophical ideas, but I highly recommend researching them.
Perfect. So moving on to our second point, we're going to talk a little bit about security. So first of all, the first thing I wanted to talk about was, as you probably heard in the news lately, the FBI was wanting to try and put a backdoor into iPhones, into the software that runs on iPhones, right? So if right now this is happening, and before, like Nico was saying, before the Internet of Things could even be considered as technically existing, like once all of this information is coming in from all of these different devices in the Internet of Things, the government's going to push even harder to get access to that information, right? That gives them more opportunity to learn things, to track bad guys, to do whatever they want to do with the data. So they're going to push harder to get that. So that might be an argument you want to run or look at as the neg, just to see what is the future going to hold for the government wanting to put backdoors in things to get access to the information. Kind of along the same note as that, if good people can get access to the information to track down bad guys, find terrorists, who's to say that the bad guys can't find information to find the people who they want to find, right?
And this is a beautiful example of a link turn, right? Any of the affirmative arguments that they provide, that they say, hey, they have access into the information, and so they can do X, Y, Z. You can also say, yeah, that means the bad guys have access to the information, which means they can do X, Y, Z. I think it's important to note that on the negative, if you can say to the judge, make them at the end of the round think that their information is insecure, then you have a huge advantage. As the negative, you should make judges feel like their stuff is going to get hacked. Now, along those lines too, moving into this, I am a server geek. I work on servers all the time. And once again, Michael's a developer. So we work with servers and we've seen a lot of security vulnerabilities. In fact, as a software developer, most of the time when software rolls out, the new versions, how it says, download this new version, the reason why is because there was security vulnerabilities in the past. Now, the scary thing about the security vulnerabilities is a lot of the time they're posted publicly online. For example, WordPress is the most prominent content management system or website creator in the entire world. And there is a website of all the plugins that WordPress uses and all of their security vulnerabilities. So any hacker that has half a brain could essentially go to these websites and hack whatever they want. Now, the other scary thing is it's really nice as businesses to keep up to date on security and software, but sometimes the software updates break other things. You guys have probably experienced this with Windows 10. I'm sorry for anyone that has it. But with Windows 10, you upgraded the operating system and so many other things broke. Or you upgraded Outlook or Google Chrome and so many other things broke. And so a lot of companies are forced to not update their security, which leaves a big hole in their system. Now, that business, yeah, that's bad that they have a security hole in their system, but when you think about it in the lens of this business holds my social security number, my phone number, my mom's maiden name, all of the information that they need to essentially hack you, that's when problems arise. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, even along with that, even when a company does want to fix something, it's not like as soon as they figure out there's a vulnerability, it's fixed like that as soon as they roll the update. They have to, first of all, identify that there's a problem, find out how to fix the problem, then roll out whatever the fix was, and then the people have to actually download the fix. And so there's a lot of time between a vulnerability being found and actually fixing it that leaves everyone open to attack during that time.
And along those lines too, to solidify my basically showing that I'm a geek, is that if you run a trace route, something called a trace route in the internet, it will show you everything that it does, every path it takes from point A to point B. So on my phone, if I upload a Google Docs, it's going to show me every single path that Google Doc takes, which is usually maybe 10 different people that it goes through. If any one of those individuals, if any of those internet service providers are insecure, that means that my data has been stolen. So there are so many different things that we could go off about. Just as some examples to go hyper specific, I'd recommend looking up SSL v2 and v3 and how they're outdated and why. There's a poodle vulnerability in Linux that I'd recommend. Basically, I'm a nerd, go specific, and we could talk about security all day.
Exactly. One last thing to mention before we move on to the next point. So even if software doesn't necessarily have security points, say if you download like a virus, spyware, like you can add vulnerabilities to your system without there being vulnerabilities in the actual other software that you meant to download. So just like you may want to look into that, do some research, find some facts on spyware, virus type things. And then one last point that we want to make before we move on to our other point here is that make sure when someone actually does steal information, you don't always necessarily know it, right? And so you can't necessarily defend yourself from things you don't know that happened. So you might want to bring up that a lot of times things get, like if someone came in and stole your fridge, I don't know, that's a stupid example, but if someone stole your fridge, you're going to notice, right? Like your fridge isn't there anymore. But if someone goes and steals your identity, you have no idea because they just simply created a copy of the information that was already there. So you might want to bring that up as a point, that is a real big detriment to security.
Absolutely. So let's move into our fourth category.
Right. So looking at the fourth point, or actually our third point.
So, I can count. Go for it.
Kind of just some other things we didn't really know exactly where they fit. So I wanted to bring up some of lead how business is being hacked, how that affects personal privacy. So obviously some other impacts besides just affecting personal privacy and identity theft. So obviously we know that a business gets hacked, you lose a bunch of people's identities, right? Let's set up that scenario. But then what happens? Then the people who lost their identities sue the company because their security wasn't up to date. The company then runs out of money. They have to lay off employees. Say they go bankrupt and all of their employees lose their jobs. Then that causes a loss of a business, right? And say that happens to a couple hundred companies. This can cause have major economic impacts besides just people losing their identities. So be sure you're tying things and like really reaching out and getting those impacts that you would see otherwise, but then tying it back to personal privacy and how, and so to make it relevant for the round.
Absolutely. And along those lines, what we can see, just from personal example once again, there's a lot of companies that were actually threatened last year because basically a company from international waters, essentially, they said that if you don't give us 100 Bitcoins, we will attack you with what's called a DDoS attack, basically destroy your network. And so a lot of companies had to fork out 100 Bitcoins, basically equivalent to $5,000 or $6,000 back when they made the threats. And a lot of companies had to fork this out. Now, the scary part about this is that we couldn't do anything. A lot of these companies went to the police, they went to the FBI, and they said, hey, track down what happened, who took my information, who took this Bitcoin, get my money back. And they said, well, it was internationally, right? Sovereignty allows us or disables us from tracking down individuals. You can make anonymous threats, you can make anonymous stealings, and you can go from there. So that's really scary. Along those lines, talking about Bitcoins has also emerged from the Internet of Things because we always have a phone on us or some electronic device. We are now developing an electronic currency. If you don't know what Bitcoins is, it's highly complicated, but essentially all you need to know is that it's an online currency that has nothing else backing it up. It is what people think it is. That is how much it's worth. But because Bitcoins are also anonymous, it has led to black markets opening up, which are absolutely dreadful, like child pornography, guns, drugs. All of these are anonymous because of Bitcoins, because the Internet of Things has allowed this to take place. So these are quite horrible impacts. Along those lines, we can also talk about how, yes, we all know that the NSA trails through a lot of information to try to find terrorists or bad individuals. But a lot of times this has forced those organizations to essentially go underground, go stealth mode. Instead of using, Gmail to transfer messages, they are finding their own means of communication, which means that the NSA is spending several $1 million and tons of people's time, several taxpayer dollars, to not find anything. We're forcing them to innovate and to go around us, which is absolutely dreadful.
Exactly. So we're going to move on to the last part of the neg, which is just the workarounds. Some things you might see in the round, again, like we did on the app. So first of all, again, I know I've said this a bunch of times, relate everything back to personal privacy. Because of the way the resolution is worded, the AF can basically say their points aren't even relevant to the topic we're discussing if you don't relate it back to personal privacy. So really, just to drive that nail home, just everything is personal privacy on the neg. Or everything stems from personal privacy, or personal privacy is the impact. So just be sure you really clarify that on every point. And now we're going to look at so not only is it the negative's duty to link everything back to personal privacy, but to show that pretty much everything can be hacked. I'm not going to say that everything can be hacked, but at the same time, I kind of want to say that everything can be hacked because given enough time, everything can be defeated, right? So make sure you're stressing that point. Make sure you're stressing that there are lots of vulnerabilities, and then show the impacts of what happens when someone's information is stolen.
Absolutely. And along those lines, talking about framework, which we kind of foreshadowed earlier, one of the frameworks that you can use to accentuate all of these arguments you're making, since they deal with emotions, and it's kind of hard to measure emotions versus, the economy. So what I would recommend is solidifying a framework with common ground. Just like when you multiply fractions, you should put them as a common denominator before doing the math. Establish a common ground. Some of these could be quality of life would actually be the one that I recommend the most, right? All of the benefits go down from the Internet of Things go down to quality of life and how it improves it. Everything from personal privacy goes down to quality of life. The other reasons why this is a fantastic framework is it's very fair for both sides. So it's one that the judge can jump on board with. If you look at the Internet of Things and why it was developed, why it's a concept, it's because it was improving the quality of human life. So the resolution itself specifies that quality of life is very important. You can also talk about how society prioritizes the quality of life above everything else. How the quality of life is essential. There's no reason why life should even exist without the quality of life. There are tons of arguments that you can make in this framework section. If you want more about framework, feel free to check out my other video, which I will post a link somewhere. It might be on Michael's face. Thank you guys so much for watching. We have enjoyed showing you essentially the raw version of our brainstorming session to try to get this video out quicker. Again, the Internet of Things actually has helped us today.
Yep.
And that my camera broke because my cat decided it'd be funny to push it over. So we're actually filming on a smartphone. Go the Internet of Things. Everything else, make sure you subscribe so that the Internet of Things can update you whenever we post a new video. Feel free to check out the Debate Clash Marketplace to support us. It would be wonderful. We've got PF Debate, Debate Doctors, Champion Briefs, Mushroom Cloud Press, and really it just helps us learn, grow, and develop more videos.
And be sure to tell your coach about our marketplace. That's really where it's going to count for us, because they usually buy the evidence for you guys. So tell your coach, yes.
And good luck at the next tournament.
Thanks.